I was diagnosed when I was 27. You don't know what the other side looks like or what it feels like or what it is like. So you imagine the worst. I mean, I think that's why blindness is probably the second most feared disease, even though it's not terminal. And that's because it's such an unknown, what's on the other side of that curtain when it falls.
We're down on the Cape. That was the first time I noticed that he had an eye problem. We had been at a party for a very short time. We decided to walk back to the boat and wait for our friend who had taken us to the party. And he tripped over, 3 or 4 rocks and things walking. And I thought, this is really bizarre. He hasn't had anything to drink, hardly. And so then Gordon talked about it and said that at night, it was sort of like, gee whiz, well, I don't know. I find I don't see very well at night anymore.
When I looked in Gordon's eye, it was a harrowing experience for me. I looked twice, and I knew in a few seconds I would be having to share this sad information with him. Gordon is courteous to the end, and I tried to be the same, but I felt I had to tell him the truth, that he had his own life to lead, a second child on the way. And I remember even saying, if you have time and there's any part of the world you haven't seen, see the world.
I'd lost all my night vision. I couldn't drive at night. I couldn't move around very well. And then in 1970, my day vision started to go very rapidly, much more atypical than usually is the case. I could almost notice one day to the next some change in my field of vision. I mean, when I'd read the paper, I could read it in paragraphs or a book and see almost the whole page, and then I went down to lines and then words, and then by the end of October of 1970, I could see just letters, and then that was gone. When you're losing your sight and it's progressive, you can still see some parts of, and then just shades of what you used to see. It's you try and deal each day with what you have, and then what you have changes. So it's a constant adjustment and very difficult, because it's very hard to start something that you expect will take some time to bring to fruition and not know whether you're going to be able to be part of it or to make it work. I mean, giving up driving in our day and age, that it's such a sign of independence and freedom. And I had to give up driving at night because I almost hit somebody coming home from the train station after a long day in New York. A fellow was walking along on the crosswalk. It wasn't, and I almost hit him. I glanced off his briefcase, and I knew instantly that I couldn't, my periphery was down so low at night that I couldn't drive. And it was a horrible thing. And I knew then, of course, I knew I had to give it up, but it taught me how difficult it is to know where you really are till it's all gone. Of course, very much at the top of it all is my relationship with my trophy bride that I married in 1966, and happily I married my trophy bride the first time around, because we're still married 47 years later, despite the fact that blindness came in and imposed a whole different set of dynamics on our relationship.
I brought a Volkswagen up to New York, and I had a carpool from 86th Street down to Wall Street, where we were both working at the time. And it was, I think I had 2 or 3 people in it to start with. And so Gordon said, that he'd like to be in it. Well, about the 4th ride down the East River Drive, he said, they assembled crowd in my car. Well, I have the ugliest pea green Pontiac station wagon, but it is comfortable. If you all would like to use that, I'd be happy to use it. So he absconded with my carpool and my wherewithal. It was pea green and it was ugly, and we had it for many years until we had it in Brooklyn Heights when it got broken into about 3 times in front of our apartment. Finally, somebody stole it. That was great.
The relationship with my mother had a lot to do with keeping him afloat during that time, and her ability to stick by him and tell him that she would be there for the long term. I think was probably an extremely comforting factor while going through all that. Knowing that someone is there with you to not, to be supportive, but also to be your eyes, I think gave him the strength to keep going.
You think of hitting that type of rock bottom and really going through something like that, and if you can survive it, your relationship is that much stronger. And I think they chose to really fight through it, and so that created a bond that I think a lot of married couples don't have.
At the very beginning, I kept wanting to say, oh, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine. We'll work this. And then I remember one evening saying to him, I thought hard about it. And it would really annoy me to have somebody sitting with me every evening say, oh, it's going to be okay.
My mom's telling him that things would be all right, I think is for a long time is probably part of human nature, right? So if you love someone, you want them to know that it's going to be all right. But I also think, you hear this about addiction and things like that, where people have to first recognize that they have a disease before they can move ahead. So if she was constantly telling him he'd be okay, I don't think they were able to really get past it. And so when part of the whole process was saying, it's a crappy deal. And
I remember saying to him, I think it's a really, really bad deal. Not even that delicate a word, but if it's more than you can stand, I understand that. But if you can stand it and want to move ahead, let's go for it, and then just let's believe it's going to work.
I can remember. This may have been during the part where she was trying to bring normalcy, and I can remember her packing us up in the car and taking my dad to a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of traffic, and then he'd get out, and he was literally running beside the car for exercise, and so people would be walking down the street, and here's this crazy woman in her car with 2 kids yelling out the window at a guy who's running beside the car, telling him not to step on the manhole or whatever. And so we were just, that was part of growing up.
There was sort of no question that they were going to get through it together, and that because of everything they were doing together, they grew closer and closer, and naturally began to function as a team. And I think sometimes dependency is perceived as a negative, but there's this mutual dependency that is really a strength for them, because they need one another, they love being together, they support one another, and they've really provided a great example of how a marriage can work.
This gets to the point of whether if my dad had not lost his sight and he'd stayed in the training program with all these high-powered guys and gone on to do all these crazy things, would he have had the marriage that he has? And I'm not so sure that would be the case. I think there's an interdependence that's been developed because of the blindness that also has created a real sense of love. So. I think there are two people who would have lived happily ever after had he not gone blind. I think because he's gone blind, they lived even more happily ever after.
I believe I won the ovarian lottery. And by that I mean that, sure, I inherited a retinal degenerative disease and as a result have lost my eyesight. But I had two very loving parents, parents who cared a great deal about each one of my siblings and me. Were very loving and wanted us to have the very best education we could have, wanted us to learn about a higher purpose and about what really did matter. When my mother became ill with cancer and was not given a long time to live, they decided to send some of us away to school. So I went away to a boarding school. And then as a result of her being quite ill and near to death for several years, she taught me a lot about keeping on. She'd go in for treatments. In those days, they were pretty crude. Very heavy chemicals and no kind of chemotherapy and certainly no surgery was done to speak of. And most people didn't live very long with cancer. And she just kept going and never let you know.
She taught you to fight. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. I had been diagnosed. I didn't tell him. I didn't really know how he would take it. A lot of people take it onto themselves, a genetic thing. You know, it's suddenly like they're responsible, they're to blame. That's crazy. I didn't want him to know about that. I had an instance where a family doctor, one of my mother's family members, lived in New York, and when I said I was having this trouble seeing at night, they suggested I see their family physician, a general practitioner. I went to see him, and he looked in my eyes. He talked with me about it. He said, you know, I think you ought to see a psychiatrist. So I did, and the psychiatrist, after several sessions, said to me, well, Gordon, you're like everybody else, you know, with a mouthful of teeth. Some of them aren't as good as the rest of them. But I don't think that's your problem. I think you should see an ophthalmologist, which is interesting how it all came together. What struck me was how little knowledge there was about these diseases, retinitis pigmentosa and the ones that are allied to it, and also about the retina. And so as Luli and I looked around more and more frenetically to try and find a way to slow or stop the progress, especially in 1970, I found dead end after dead end.
Some people thought that transplanting muscles in the back of the eye to increase the circulation might help. There was a theory that if you cut the sympathetic fibers in the neck, you would dilate the vessels on that side of the head and perhaps improve the blood flow.
Well, I had a faith healer who worked with me for a time in England. Some great friends had this friend who'd been tremendously helped with some other ailment with this faith healer. So, you know, what the heck? I was in London, I'd try it. There were other therapies. I didn't try them because I talked to people who had, and they had not had a good experience. One was bee stings, 100 at a time, in the back of the neck to try and stimulate the adrenaline, to stimulate the rods and cones in the eyes. There was a treatment in Cuba that was purported to work, and it's one of those things. The placebo effect was so strong that the people who spent their life savings were taking a real risk with not just their eyesight, but their health.
Well, and then there was Russia.
I think I would say that it was really a leap of faith and kind of a what he thought at the time, again, family lore, was that it was a treatment that would work. And he left me as a newborn, my mother, and my brother, who was 2.5, and went to try and find a cure that he thought was there. And this was at the end of a long line of cures that he had tried.
The potential therapy that the Russians were claiming they had was written up in the newspaper. Actually, the New York Times had it, and there were a few other newspapers that covered this claim. So I called a doctor who I'd seen along the way when I was looking for ways to stop my disease, and I asked him if this was something worth my trying, and he looked it up, and he came back and he said, well, you know, I don't think it can hurt you.
There had been an attempt with placental extract in the Soviet Union to try to save function, and although it didn't have a proven scientific track record, I believe as a compassionate human being, every person should have a chance to try things, even if it's, so to speak, a last Hail Mary pass, as we would say.
I think it's human nature to always want something to hang on, to hope for. And that was certainly my case. And I'd build it up in my own mind that this treatment might be the answer. It was the only one left.
I had the same hopes, but I don't think I was as aware of how much he had pinned on it.
My brother Graham very kindly took me over. Luli had just had Zachary, our youngest son, and just a few weeks before. Unfortunately, I did get to see him before I lost all of my sight, and I'll never forget that. It's very important to both of us. But when Graham took me over, I went for a treatment that I thought would only be a few days, and it turned out it was more than a month.
Gordon had said he would call me right away when he got there. And then I went 4 days and thinking he'd be home even by then, without hearing anything from him. And I didn't even know we couldn't locate him. And so I think the panic, I really got scared that something awful had happened.
That was a very important time in my beginning to learn to deal with blindness. I couldn't even find my way to the bathroom, just to give you an idea. And the place was in pretty bad shape. I mean, the walls had crumbling paint. It had bare light bulbs hanging down from the ceiling. It hadn't had a lot of attention. And they didn't have toilets that flushed. A lot of just basic things. You could get a shower once a week. And then I found out that it was going to be a lot longer than I had been told. That changed the dynamics of things pretty quickly.
He was over there so long, and his brother had to come back for exams. And so I went over to join him and help him come home. And when I got there, I just couldn't believe the conditions. The floors, they had been done with lye, washed with lye, so many times that they were white and the boards were buckled. And it just didn't look like any medical facility I'd ever seen.
Their treatments weren't non-scientific, but they had long ago been surpassed by other kinds of medicines. You were using ultra-high frequency sound that you'd lie on your back and they'd transduce it into your eyes through a water bath. The theory being that they'd wake up the cells that were dying before they died. And then they would give you animal biostimulants. I mean, one of them was an extract of placenta in shots. So I had 12, 15 injections a day. And I had them in my temples, which meant they were close to where my eyes were, to the source of my problem. They still, at that point, were using needles that you sharpened on a block thing. And they were, they were bigger than anything I'd seen. It was frightening. I think the fact, not just that he'd lost weight, but his color was pale. I just thought, oh goodness, this isn't a good place to be. No, we got to get home.
And I think he just sort of said, by 3 weeks in, with these shots to the temple and everything, and he's like, what am I doing here? And I'm all alone, and I just, I think that's where he sort of just accepted it.
He hit rock bottom and kind of felt, okay, I've exhausted all of these supposed treatments that are out there, and I have to come to terms with the fact that I will be blind for the indefinite future.
I think he had hope when he went to Russia, but he lost hope.
I think he literally lost it that month in Russia.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So retinal degenerations in 1970 on some level were considered rare diseases. Part of the rareness was that people went to a hospital, were told they had the problem, there was no hope, and they should just go home. And so many people with RP were naturally feeling very lonely and wondering if anybody was interested in their problem.
You have to put it in the context of the time, in that 1970, 1971, your image of a blind person at the time is not somebody who's out there doing a lot of stuff, especially if you've been the guy who's out there doing a lot of stuff.
The kind of stereotypical view that blindness meant you had no other value to offer, that you were done, that if you were blind, you really shouldn't go out on your own, you shouldn't try and do anything. You couldn't. I have had times when somebody in a restaurant, a server at the table might come over and we've ordered coffee, and then they'll turn to Luli and say, well, would he like sugar in his coffee or cream? And I have to think, well, wait a second, you could ask me, you know. I can answer that question. So I took a lot of time thinking about, most of all, what really mattered to me in my life. What it was like kind of counting blessings. You only have a couple of choices in these things. Once the die is cast and you know it is, and you've tried every way you can to change it, you can either wring your hands and worry about it and wonder why me, and am I, who's going to take care of me, or how am I going to exist? Or you can say, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to find a way around it. I'm going to work around it, find a way to do the things I want to do, that I feel I can do, in the best way I can.
I realized in a way it was it sounds terrible to say, but a gift, because all during the period when everybody was thinking they should be chairman of the board of Merrill Lynch or something like that, all of a sudden we were a team trying to work on something.
I'd always thought, well, because I have some resources, if I am successful in building a business, that it would just be because I had this leg up or opportunity from birth. And now all of a sudden that didn't matter. And so it was freeing in that way too, in the sense that I didn't have to be, it didn't matter anymore what people thought about what I might have had in the way of an edge or an opportunity that was given to me, because now there was something that wasn't given to them that I had to deal with.
It changed his view on what he could be in life. And I think that was, so if Russia is the bottom, this is the start of the rise when he met Jim Wheat.
It didn't take me long to realize that blind people are not handicapped or challenged. It's the sighted that make them that way, because he led such a normal life. He did everything anybody else did, and I mean, he couldn't see it. For instance, he never saw his son Jimmy, and he never saw his wife Wally, but he knew what they looked like.
I really didn't know a lot of other blind people when I was growing up other than my father. So at the same time, I had high expectations for any other blind person I met. and how they made the most of the senses they had. And he, frankly, leveraging it much more than a lot of sighted people.
I mean, he always used the word see. So it became like, worked for him for 19 years, and it became like it was not an issue at all, ever. It just became such a natural thing. I didn't even think of it. If I went into his office, I said, Jim, I want you to see this. And that's the way he talked. He'd get on the elevator and say, nice to see you.
He was hugely successful. He enjoyed the things in his office and the view overlooking the Rappahannock, even though he couldn't see it, but he could describe it to you in detail. And I began to think, oh, blind doesn't mean just a black and white life.
My dad is similar. He has paintings and pictures up in his office, and I think he learned that from seeing Jim Wheat and seeing, okay, I don't need to sort of pull the shades and put my sunglasses on and sit there in a dark room for the rest of my life.
So you had an instant feeling that this was a man who was living his life absolutely to the fullest. I don't think kids mean to be mean, but kids are just so forthright. I mean, they just say it like it is. So I can remember, times when you'd hear one kid say, well, how can you play baseball? Your dad couldn't teach you to play baseball. He can't throw a ball, or he can't catch a ball. So I think that there's a period in the childhood where it's hard. And also just our boys are both fantastic about going with Gordon anywhere, on the elbow. And it's now, when you're grown, it's fine. But when you're 13.
I made up stories of how he went blind. I found it hard doing some of the youth sports, ice hockey, having him come to a practice or coaching. And that was never easy to sort of know what you were missing out on.
He did a masterful job of thinking of things that we could do together. So fishing, for example, became something, and it is to this day, something that we love to do together as a family.
They all used to make Gordon come up on our pond when it froze and make him be the goalie. That's like a sick joke. But he's pretty good. Well, the goal we made was pretty small, so Gordon could cover up a lot of it.
And I was the easiest goalie they'll ever face. When the pond would freeze and we'd go up and they'd be skating, it was a lot of fun, actually. But I tried to stay involved with whatever they were doing any way I could, and could without making them feel really embarrassed or destroying their love of whatever it was.
It's obviously very different having a blind parent, but when it's all you sort of, that's what you have. So I try not to think of it as something that makes me really different. It's more makes me who I am.
It was a snowy, ice cold day, and he's going to the bank, and inadvertently his cane hit this woman's heel, and the woman just turned around and said, you goddamn blind Polak bastard. And Gordon said to her, oh my goodness, have a good day. Because she was just so mad, but he was so happy that instead of somebody saying, oh my gosh, I've just said something terrible to a blind man, she just went on, as he went down the block after him. And he thought, yes, no, they don't feel sorry for me a bit. She's mad as hell.
He really knows where he wants to go. He really listens a lot. He listens to our interests, he listens to our problems, he listens to opportunities for improvement. And when you do all that, it makes people successful.
I would say one thing that he has been able to do with his blindness is really see people for their qualities, and that's sounds trite, but it's true. He sees people in a different way. He's not focused on their physical appearance, but he can really, and see may not be the best word, but I think of it as seeing, because he's able to spot qualities in people that others might not.
I think people don't know sometimes what they're communicating audibly, and they're trying to communicate something very different visually, because that's how they're used to cueing people and trying to get things across in a visual way, how they look, how they react, how their body language, what their body language is, a lot of things that are lost on me. And yet what I am hearing are a lot about what they really think, what they really feel.
So he famously had, well, in Cleveland, when he was running the Cavaliers, the guy who was running the business was very overweight, and he's an incredible guy, very overweight. I think that guy would tell you in life that a lot of people would look at him differently, or may not have given him the chance.
We had first worked with him when he was on the other side of the table, and we were negotiating an arrangement with his company, and I was really impressed with how he did that, how he spoke. I didn't know that he weighed over 300 pounds, and I really admired him. And he took the fillings out of our teeth in the process. He was a very good negotiator, but he also could put it in a wonderful way, and you could understand his position very well. So later, when we took over the ownership of that business, the first thing I did was ask him if he would run it for us.
Gordon probably has the best recollection of any person I've ever met. The things that he can remember and how he does the things that he does are really truly beyond explanation in some respects. He has such recall in his mind. It's unbelievable how sharp he is.
He can be tough too. You do not push him around, and you don't try to bamboozle him. So I think he's been very successful in business because he's super smart, always does his homework. The man is always totally prepared. It certainly, shows me that somebody can be in that business and be a very humane person, but make no mistake, he's a very sharp businessman and nobody pushes him around.
And the introduction to sculpture was really through this friend Gibby, who got him going. And I don't think he ever had thought about doing it before, and I think once he started doing it, he realized it was something he could feel.
Oh, no question, sculpting helps me stay in touch with the world, and also really with myself, because it's a lot of fun. And the textures, whether it's wood or it's clay or it's stone, and it's very absorbing. I put some music on, various kinds, and I'll go for hours. And it is one of the most relaxing things I can do.
The impetus for that really came from the guy he met, our caretaker on Nantucket, who just introduced him to that, and he fell in love with it right away.
Gib was sort of a third generation Nantucketer, and very almost a Renaissance man, and it used to drive him crazy when we first bought the house that Gordon would always be, when he was up there, working. And he thought, this just isn't right. So he came one day and said to Gordon, you ought to come down here and try carving. And he had a white pine blank of a whale and a penknife for himself and one for Gordon. And they went down and were sitting on the porch of our beach house, and they start carving. And Gordon's whale was beginning to look as though it had been under shark attack, because he had just cut his hands, you know, nicked himself and everything. But Gibby just wasn't even phasing him. You know, a penknife is really sharp, and the white pine will absorb all blood.
I think the tactile part of it is something that, you know, he just really felt like he could do, and there's an independence to it that he doesn't have in anything else in his life. I mean, he can go, and he does spend hours in his studio just either carving or molding clay, and he just loves it.
Once I've got a sense of what I want to do, it's all in my head. I actually turn it around. I look at it inside my head from every angle so that I have a feeling for how it might look if you were looking at it from behind it or one side or the other or underneath or up above. I'll wake up in the middle of the night when I've got something I'm really into, and I'll think about it. It's a great way actually to keep from thinking about the other things that keep you up all night, and it's kind of it's fun to try and see this thing from every angle, and then I'll go right down to the basement and work on it the next morning if I come up with some better way of doing something or dealing with something. So it's a mixture of the past, present things I touch, and what I do with it in my head. One of the things, though, that has always struck me, because I've met a lot of people who are blind, and in some cases blind and deaf, is I am in awe of what they do every day in their lives, and so that really inspires me, and it means that if I have the resources that I have, and I'm fortunate enough to have them, that I've got to do even more.
I think he hopes to find a cure to retinal degenerative diseases, full spectrum, all of them. And I think that's his, I know that that's the biggest accomplishment for him, that he could achieve. And that's the one that he holds out there.
I'm continually impressed at the number of people that I run into who are running to Russia for an eye injection or getting bee sting injections into their eyes or ozone therapy, or the latest thing now is stem cell therapy, where they get fat extracted from their own body and it's injected into their eye. I don't understand the biological basis of any expectation of improvement from those kind of approaches, but what these stories show to me is the desperation that these people have. Seeing their vision disappearing and losing their sight is so scary, so terrifying and devastating that they're willing to try anything.
I think that's a big reason why the foundation from the very beginning was really strictly dedicated to scientifically based research. Is if we were going to offer that kind of hope, we had to do it from a base of scientific knowledge.
And I think the Foundation Fighting Blindness is the voice of reason, telling people what things are quackery and what things are promising, and whether it'd be better to hold off and wait another year to try something which is on the burner versus go out and try something that's totally untested and has no scientific basis for it.
That's kind of everything in my mind, is the notion that suddenly what you thought your life was going to be is drastically different, and at the same time you find a real purpose, which for him throughout my life has been this desire to find a cure for not just his own blindness but everybody.
I think what he has more than maybe he ever had was a sense that he has a real worth in the world, so that he won't ever have to answer to people and say, you're the rich guy who got the job at the chase, running the chase, or the guy who is doing this because of the wealth you had growing up. he can now say that he had a pretty lousy hand, and he was able to take that and create a foundation that's, I think, on the verge of curing blindness.
We got very lucky early on. We had not only a rallying cry, which was the first multidisciplinary laboratory for the study of these diseases. There wasn't any such thing then, even though there were a lot of disciplines that played into this. We found a doctor, Elliot Burson, who had the idea of putting together the first laboratory, and that became the initial focus for the foundation.
The theory behind the lab is that more would be done by a group of scientists working together with different disciplines than anyone could do by themselves.
The field was really barren when we started. The landscape had no one else in it, and we just plugged away at it. And so we had to start from the beginning and bring in people, attract them in with career development awards and postdoc fellows. And as we started raising money for that, we began to understand how many people out there were desperate for this same kind of opportunity, for this kind of research, and for the result of it. We got inspired by them, more and more inspired, and we also got inspired by people that we were able to bring into the scientific advisory board.
And all of them started, pro bono. I mean, we didn't have anything to give away, and it's certainly the Retinitis Pigmentosa Foundation was not a name that was going to vault you into the medical records right away. And yet they stayed with us.
Our initial group, one of the major drivers of that group were the Bermans. They were just phenomenal. And Ben Berman was unstoppable. I mean, just not to be denied, and in terms of fundraising and in terms of pushing the doctors to do everything they could. 2 of his 3 daughters had a form of retinitis pigmentosa, and they were losing their sight, and he didn't want that to happen.
When you think back to the founding, they didn't even know these were genetically inherited diseases. They knew very, very little. This field would not exist the way it does right now without Gordon and Lily and their commitment to this over 35 years. It's a long time.
And Gordon's like the maestro in the symphony. He has all the sections working. He's got research, and he's got clinical trials, and he's got fundraising and operation. And Gordon knows how, he has in his mind how the piece is going to play out. And he knows just enough how to balance it. You can't have a little too much of anything. And it gets back to he knows where he wants to go. He's assembled the right people, and he listens.
But it's just like the qualities with which he leads. He can infer something. He can pass on a feeling in a general way that sort of becomes infectious.
And you have to have a leader that is very focused on what their goal is. He is always looking at what's happening somewhere else. He's so broad-minded, he may be flying to Africa, to France, to Sweden, to London, to Israel, and speaking with people. All Gordon wants are cures and treatments.
So I find him just this very, very unique combination of qualities that I've never seen in one person before, and I think it's why he's been able to build this organization to what it is.
When I think about what's changed with the possibilities of treating retinitis pigmentosa, I really find myself sort of reaching for metaphors such as avalanches or exploding stars, and I've never really, and I won't even try to come up with a better metaphor. I can simply say, we have said from day one that when we understand these diseases well enough, we'll be able to provide treatments. But I would have to say candidly, most of us who said that, although we have faith in the future, knew that that was off distant science fiction. But as recently, and I would say as recently as the year 2000, it was still science fiction that there might be treatments. We are in 2013, and there's gene therapy which has shown success. There are stem cell therapies which have shown success. There are other forms of drug-related therapies which have shown success for treating retinitis pigmentosa.
All of that has been brought into existence by the Foundation Fighting Blindness.
You know, our dream, and Gordon says it best, is nobody will ever have to hear with a diagnosis of an inherited retinal degeneration, go home, learn Braille, get a guide dog, get a screen reader. No, what they're going to hear, oh, yeah, you have this, but we've got a treatment for that and you don't have to worry.
My initial motivation was to help my child. And as crass as this might seem, that commitment really grew when I began to understand what this foundation and the leadership, the quality of leadership of Gordon Gund could do for the world.
Our goal is to go out of business. Our goal is to pack up shop. We've taken care of it. Nobody's ever going to go blind due to inherited retinal degeneration.
I think fighting is the right choice, word choice for the foundation. The perception was that the odds were too great to overcome and that they could never accomplish what they were saying they would do. And so they needed a fight, and all that joined them needed to have a fighting attitude to be able to overcome those odds.
Well, I don't think he feels vindicated. I think it's more that I've spent my whole life doing this, and it's working. And you know, there were certainly people telling him along the way, probably, that you shouldn't be funding this area of research. You should be focused more on that. And there's numerous times where he's had to face families that tell him you're not moving fast enough. So I think the news of a dog being able to see was exciting, because he could tell a lot of folks that, look, we're on the right track. And for all you people who've been with me for 30 years, we're on the right track.
That was really the moment where a lot of that hard work and those years and years of trying paid off, or at least gave the glimmer of hope that it was going to pay off.
Super exciting time when Lancelot gained his sight, and it certainly it put a wind in everyone's sails as it related to the foundation. And you know, you go to these events for the foundation, and they get old, you know. But when you hear that, and that puts all these dinners and auctions and things in perspective, that the money went to finding a cure for blindness in a dog, and look what's come of that. So then now we're in human trials on a number of things, and that's just that's really exciting.
We really wanted to do this for a long time. We went to many different groups looking for support, and including large pharma, and they would all say, wow, isn't that data in the dog models, isn't that incredible? Wouldn't it be great to do that in a child? And then they would say, well, how many people are there with this condition in the United States? And we'd say, well, perhaps 350. And they'd say, okay, too bad. So the foundation really has been the one group all along that has supported development of new treatments for these rare disorders.
To all of us here at Children's Hospital, one of the most exciting times in the Phase 1/2 study was the enrollment of one of the first younger subjects, a little boy who was 8 years old.
You aren't always able to extrapolate results from animal studies to human studies. So there was that little question mark, and of course, anxiety, maybe, particularly with a child. But it was a great story. It worked.
It feels almost biblical. And even when you're witnessing it, it's just, for me, a little hard to completely take in.
From the time I got involved 24 years ago, where all there was at the time was hope, we now have reality. And you have taken children or young adults who could not see 3-4 years ago. And through the miracle of gene therapy, they're able to see now. I don't think you need hope anymore. I think you see reality, and it's just time, and of course money.
It's almost like you can taste it. I feel it. There are already some therapies out there for some of these diseases that are really helping people, and there are many more. Really, we're on the threshold of a tremendous number of breakthroughs. So knowing that is part of why I fight as hard as I do and why I continue to. I really feel we're on the cusp of making a huge difference to millions of people around the world.
So do I think that finding these treatments for the rare form of retinitis pigmentosa will have application elsewhere in society? Absolutely yes, and I can already give you significant examples where advances in treating retinitis pigmentosa are now being tried to treat brain disorders, are now being tried to treat hearing disorders. You're seeing a kind of flowing out from the specific forms of treatments to the whole world of now medical genetic diseases, which affect millions of people, and more complex diseases. So there's a tremendous almost you might call it the Velcro effect with the space program. We went to the moon and brought a couple rocks back, but we also brought all sorts of technologies to the planet which have transformed our lives. I think the same thing is happening in medicine through treatments of retinitis pigmentosa and treatments of inherited eye diseases in general.
A rising tide lifts all the boats, and that's always been the case. If we can learn more about the retina and about the whole visual process, we're going to help everybody. We're going to go way beyond just one disease or another disease, and in fact go to helping diseases that are outside of our purview, like diabetic retinopathy and even glaucoma. And even further than that, since the retina is the only part of the brain you can see from outside the body, we are informing other central nervous system disease research in a major way.
For me, the word hope has been replaced with the word promise, because we can see the end of the road now. We know we can affect these diseases. When Gordon first began with this, there was nothing. There was a shrug of the shoulders. And truly, he's the architect. He's the father of giving the experience to humanity that people can really change this world. It's not only the scientists that do it, but it's those that create the environment for these things to be done.
It's very interesting to see how Gordon has responded to tremendous loss. Instead of being discouraged or giving up, it's made him that much more determined to accomplish his goal. And it's not because he wants to do this for himself, it's because he doesn't want anyone else to experience the tremendous loss that he has. And so despite the odds, he wouldn't give up. He hasn't given up, he never will.
You know, everybody takes their own path when they are confronted with a particular obstacle in life, and a very hard obstacle to take on. Some people become bitter, some people become angry. Gordon went the other way. He saw it as a growth for him in his humanity and his ability to understand what others are going through. Gordon's a very compassionate individual and an understanding individual.
He has accepted this, and I don't, and it comes down to when we ask him whether he thinks he'll ever be able to see again, you know, or whether he's done this foundation, you know, to provide himself with hope that he might see. And he always deflects and says, no, it's really for the next generation. It's for the kids in the videos that you see when you go to these FFB events, these kids who are losing their sight, or the parents who are watching their kids lose their sight.
Here he is. I don't even know if he knows his gene yet. And he certainly has not, to my knowledge at least, has not been involved in a clinical trial, which suggests that we still don't know enough about how to treat him. Yet he's so excited about hearing the progress with all of these other clinical trials, the Corey Haas story, all the other adults and children who are now being enrolled in other studies.
Gordon believed from day one that there would be treatments. Anybody who has a realistic appreciation of how science is done, not just in the United States, but in the world, knows that the foundation was central to that. And if you know anything about human affairs, you know there has to be a linchpin. There has to be a single person whose drive makes that happen. And in this case, that single person is Gordon.
I was traveling with Gordon, and we were talking about something, and I said, Gordy, what if there comes a time when really that there's some hope for you to regain sight? How will you feel? He said, Ed, I've become so accustomed to having no sight that I don't think that I would change my life again. As far as my kids are concerned, truly I don't know if the answers will be there in time. But it will for my grandchildren and for the grandchildren of others. And the incredible part of it to me is once these things are accomplished, they're forever. They will never go away.